The sandstorm hit like a wall of broken glass. Lieutenant Commander Nathaniel Mercer pressed himself against the scorched rock sand, cutting into every exposed inch of skin. The radio crackled with static and desperation. Contact left, heavy machine gun, 12 o'clock, high. The desert valley had become a killing floor. What should have been a straightforward hostage extraction had turned into a meticulously planned ambush. Someone had leaked their route, their timing, their tactics. The enemy waited in elevated positions, turning the narrow canyon into a perfect death funnel. SEAL Team 9 was pinned down. Nate counted his men. 8 operators, 3 wounded. Corpsman Everett Hayes worked frantically on Petty Officer Garrett Sullivan, whose leg had been shredded by shrapnel. The rest returned fire when they could, but the suppressing fire from above was relentless. Every time someone moved, a fresh barrage of rounds turned the sand into deadly clouds. "Mercer, we need air support." Sergeant Marcus Bennett's voice cut through the chaos. "We're getting hammered." Nate checked his tactical display. The nearest Apache was 40 minutes out. They had maybe 10 minutes before the enemy flanked their position or brought up heavier ordnance. The sandstorm made visual confirmation nearly impossible. They were firing blind, conserving ammunition for a last stand that seemed inevitable. Through his scope, Nate caught glimpses of movement. 20 hostiles, maybe more. 3 heavy machine gun positions. 1 sniper who had already taken out their best chance at counterfire. The geometry of death was simple and absolute. "Command, this is Eagle 9. Nate transmitted, knowing the signal was being jammed but trying anyway. "We are pinned down. Heavy contact. 3 urgent casualties. Request immediate." A mortar round exploded 30 meters to their right, showering them with rock and sand. The concussion wave felt like a physical punch. Behind the largest boulder hunched over his damaged radio equipment, Master Sergeant Daniel Patterson worked with methodical precision despite the blood running down his left arm. At 62 years old, Hawk shouldn't have been here at all. He'd retired 3 years ago after 4 decades of service. But when command needed someone who understood desert warfare, who'd trained half the snipers in Joint Special Operations Command, they'd called him back. "One advisory mission," they'd said. "Share your expertise. Stay behind the lines." The shrapnel that had torn through his forearm and destroyed his radio proved how worthless those promises were. "Hawk, can you get comms back up?" Nate called. The older man's hands moved with practiced efficiency, rewiring connections that had been severed by the blast. "Working on it, Commander. But even if I get this running, the jamming's thick as mud." Petty Officer Liam Morrison, barely 23 years old, his face streaked with sand and blood, whispered what they were all thinking. "We're pinned down. We're not making it out." Nate had been in combat for 15 years. He knew the math, he knew the odds. He knew the sound of a battle turning from difficult to impossible. The sand swirled, thicker visibility dropping to less than 50 meters. The enemy fire intensified, a coordinated push to overrun their position. Nate prepared his final rally. The orders you give when the only victory left is how you die. Then the enemy sniper's head exploded. Not figuratively, not a figure of speech. The man had been positioned behind a rock outcropping 400 meters upslope. Even through the sandstorm, even with the chaos, Nate knew precision when he saw it. That wasn't suppressing fire. That wasn't luck. Someone else was on this battlefield. "Did anyone take that shot?" Bennett called out. Silence from the team. They were all accounted for, all focused on their immediate threats. "Negative," Nate replied, scanning the storm. "We have an unknown shooter." Another shot cracked through the wind. One of the heavy machine gun positions went silent. Not the gun. The gunner. Surgical professional, impossibly accurate given the conditions. "Who the hell is covering us?" Morrison breathed. Hawk's head snapped up from his damaged radio, something changing in his weathered face. He grabbed his scope with his good hand, training it toward the ridge where the shots had originated. His lips moved, counting the seconds between reports, calculating windage, reading the pattern. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." "Hawk," Nate pressed closer. "You know who's shooting." The old sniper instructor's eyes remained fixed on the distant ridgeline, watching for the next muzzle flash that would never come. She was already moving. He'd taught her that. Static positions meant death. "That second shot," Hawk said quietly, his voice carrying a weight Nate had never heard before. 450 meters, ricochet angle through partial concealment, adjusting for wind shear in a sandstorm. "Hawk, what are you?" There's only one person I ever trained who could make that shot. The older man lowered his scope, something like hope and pain mixing in his expression. Captain Elena Cross. Morrison's eyes went wide. Cross, the ghost of nightfall. She's dead. Everyone knows. Everyone's wrong. Hawk keyed his radio, switching to a frequency he hadn't used in 18 months. Wraith 6, this is Hawk. If you're out there, come home. Static answered. Wind and electronic warfare interference. Nothing. Then cutting through the noise, a voice Nate had never expected to hear again. A voice that Command had listed as deceased. A voice that belonged to a legend. Hawk, soft, uncertain, carrying 18 months of isolation and grief. Is that really you? The old instructor's hand tightened on the radio. It's me, kid, and you just saved our lives. Not yet, I haven't. The voice hardened, became tactical, professional. You're surrounded on 3 sides. Enemy count 22 down from 25. 1 machine gun position left. No mortars yet, but they're moving one up. You've got maybe 8 minutes before they overrun you. Elena, Hawk's voice cracked. Where have you been? Staying alive. Staying alone. A pause. I'll explain later. Right now, sit tight. I'm coming to you. The transmission cut off. Nate stared at Hawk. She's alive. Cross is alive. More than alive. The old man checked his sidearm, his wounded arm forgotten. She's operational, and if she's moving toward us, she's about to remind everyone why they called her Wraith. 6 hours earlier and 12 kilometers to the east, Captain Elena Cross had been tracking a different target entirely. The arms dealer was supposed to meet his contact at the abandoned mining facility at sunset. Elena had been in position since dawn, buried in a spider hole she'd dug the night before, covered with a camouflage net and 6 inches of sand. The Barrett M82A1 lay beside her, clean and ready. At 30 pounds loaded, it wasn't a weapon designed for mobility. But Elena had never fought that way. She'd spent 6 hours in that hole, barely moving, controlling her breathing, becoming part of the desert. This was what solo operations meant. No backup, no support, no one to share the watch or the weight. Just you, your weapon, and the mission. She'd chosen this. After nightfall, after Command tried to bury her with paperwork and psychiatric evaluations, after they'd listed her as medically retired due to psychological trauma, she'd volunteered for the blackest of black operations. The kind of missions that didn't officially exist. The kind where if you failed, no one came looking. The kind where no one else could die for your mistakes. Through her scope, Elena watched the facility entrance. The dealer was late, not unusual. These men survived by being paranoid and unpredictable. That's when she heard it, at first just static. The emergency frequency crackling through her earpiece, buried under layers of electronic warfare jamming. Most operators would have dismissed it as noise. Elena had been trained by the best. She heard the pattern beneath the chaos. Emergency protocol, Delta sequence, SEAL team in distress. She closed her eyes, listening deeper, the way Hawk had taught her a decade ago. Trust your ears, Elena, he'd said during those brutal training sessions in the mountains. Eyes can be fooled, terrain lies, but sound tells truth. Learn to hear the shape of the battlefield. She heard it now, the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire, the deeper boom of explosives, and beneath it all, the desperate edge of men fighting for their lives. The transmission was too fragmented to make out words, but she caught the call sign. Eagle 9, a SEAL team, surrounded, dying. Elena made her decision in 3 seconds. The arms dealer could wait. Someone else could track him. But those men in the desert, they had minutes, not hours. Every second she hesitated was another second closer to body bags and folded flags. She'd lived that nightmare once. Watched through a scope while good men died and her shots arrived too late. Never again. Elena broke down her position with practiced efficiency. Scope collapsed. Barrett slung across her back. Secondary weapon secured. Within 2 minutes she was running. 12 kilometers in desert terrain with 70 pounds of gear wasn't a sprint. It was controlled agony. But Elena had spent 18 months pushing her body beyond normal limits, training like she was trying to outrun ghosts. Maybe she was. The sand grabbed at her boots. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. The Barrett across her back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She ignored it all and ran. Her mind drifted as her body moved, mechanical, automatic. It always did during the hard miles. Back to the day that had changed everything. 18 months ago, Operation Nightfall. Elena saw it in fragments, flashes of memory that never quite formed a complete picture, like a film reel with frames missing. The briefing room, Colonel Marcus Reeves standing at the front, his face carved from granite, and 40 years of certainty. Captain Cross, you'll take Overwatch position on Ridge 47, 800 meters from the target. Your support, not assault. Her objection. Sir, I'm qualified for close quarters. His interruption. You're qualified to follow orders, Captain. Overwatch, that's final. The look Hawk had given her across the room. He'd been there as senior instructor, evaluating the team for certification. The disapproval in his eyes had been clear. But Hawk was retired or recalled only for assessment. He had no authority over the mission. The desert at night. Elena, in position on the ridge scope, trained on the compound below. Her team's 7 men she trained with fought beside, trusted with her life, moving through the darkness toward the target. Captain Thomas Donovan, leading. 42 years old, 3 daughters, a laugh that could shake the walls. Sergeant Michael Stevens behind him, the best breacher Elena had ever seen. Sergeant Brandon Parker on point, moving like a ghost himself. Seapole Connor Walsh with the saw, young but steady. Sergeant Derek Coleman with demo charges, always humming old country songs. PO1, Ethan Brooks handling comms, a genius with electronics. And PO2, Declan Sullivan, the medic, who'd once told Elena that saving lives mattered more than taking them. 7 good men. Through her scope, Elena watched them approach the compound. Perfect spacing, perfect tactics, everything by the book. Then the world exploded. The ambush had been coordinated with military precision. RPG from the left, machine gun fire from 3 positions, mortars that had been pre-sighted on the approach route. The enemy had known. Every detail, every step. Elena started shooting before her conscious mind registered the threat. 400 meters, enemy fighter rising with an RPG, center mass, damn, then 500 meters, machine gunner in a window, headshot, and done. 380 meters, squad leader directing fire, through a gap in the wall, done. Her rifle spoke with mechanical precision. 15 hostiles in 3 minutes. But her team was dying faster than she could engage. Parker's hit, Donovan's voice over comms. Parker's down. Elena swung her scope, found the shooter fired. The man dropped, but Parker was already gone. She'd been 3 seconds too late. Stevens? No Stevens. She found the grenade thrower, put a round through his chest before he could throw again. But Stevens was sprawled in the courtyard, not moving. 4 seconds too late. Medic, we need... The transmission cut off in a burst of gunfire. Elena watched Coleman fall. 5 seconds too late. Her scope tracked frantically, trying to find targets, trying to protect them. But 800 meters was too far. The distance she could see clearly was the same distance that made her help arrive in the wrong moment. Always seconds too late. Always just beyond the threshold of saving instead of avenging. Cross, Donovan's voice strained with pain. Cross, stay position. Cover our extract. There won't be an extract. She was screaming into her radio now. Professionalism shattered. Let me come to you, I can reach. Negative. That was Reeves on the command net, safe in the operations center 15 miles away. Cross, you are ordered to maintain Overwatch. Hold your position. She watched Walsh try to reach cover, watched him stumble, watched him fall, 6 seconds too late. Brooks died trying to call for help, his radio still in his hand. 7 seconds too late. Declan Sullivan, young idealistic Declan, who believed in saving lives, took 3 rounds covering Donovan's retreat. 8 seconds too late. And Donovan. Captain Thomas Donovan, who'd once told Elena she was the best shot he'd ever seen, who'd recommended her for every commendation she'd received, who had 3 daughters who would grow up without their father. She watched him die last, alone in the courtyard, surrounded by his dead team, still fighting. 9 seconds too late. Elena was moving before his body hit the ground, abandoning her position, slinging her rifle, running down the ridge toward the compound. 800 meters of open ground. Reeves was yelling in her ear, ordering her to stop threatening court-martial. She didn't care, but by the time she reached the compound, it was over. 7 bodies, 23 dead enemies surrounding them. The quick reaction force was already inbound, their rotors cutting the night air. Elena had knelt in the dust beside Donovan, his blood soaking into the sand, and understood that she'd killed 23 men and saved exactly 0. The debriefing had been worse than the mission. Reeves standing over her face, purple with rage. You abandoned your position. You violated direct orders. My position was too far. Her voice had been hollow empty. You kept me too far away to help them. You were exactly where I put you. Support, overwatch, where women belong in combat operations. 7 men are dead. 7 men are dead because the enemy knew we were coming, because intel was compromised, not because you weren't holding their hands. If I'd been with them, you'd be dead too. Reeves had slammed his hand on the table. You're support personnel, Captain. You provide cover. You don't assault. That's not what women are built for. She'd stood then, something cold and final settling in her chest. Then I'm done being support. The psychiatric evaluation had been perfunctory. Textbook trauma response, they'd said. Survivor's guilt. Post-traumatic stress. She'd let them believe it. Let them write their reports about how she'd cracked under pressure, how she needed time to process the loss. The truth was simpler and harder. She hadn't cracked. She'd calculated. In a system where colonels kept you 800 meters from where you could do good, where your skills were wasted because of your gender, where 7 men died because you weren't allowed close enough to save them, you needed to leave that system. So she'd requested reassignment to solo operations. The blackest missions. No team to protect, no one to watch die, no one to fail. Command, perhaps eager to bury the nightfall disaster, had approved. Captain Elena Cross had disappeared into the shadows, and Wraith had been born. The memory faded as Elena crested the final ridge and saw the valley below. The sandstorm was biblical in scale, a wall of particulate fury that turned the world brown and gray. But Elena had spent 3 years training in conditions like this. Hawk had made sure of that. Desert warfare is won by whoever adapts fastest, he'd taught her. Learn to fight blind. Learn to shoot through case. Learn to make the storm your ally. She dropped prone, unslung the Barrett, and scanned through her scope. SEAL Team 9 was trapped in a depression surrounded on 3 sides. She counted hostiles. 22 now. 3 heavy machine gun positions. No mortar team visible yet, but she heard the distinctive sound of a tube being set up beyond the eastern ridge. Her breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to wind speed distance target. 400 meters. Eastern ridge. Machine gunner rising to fire. Elena adjusted for wind, 15 kilometers per hour from the northeast, gusting to 20. Adjusted for the turbulent air of the sandstorm, the way it would buffet the round. Adjusted for the slight upward angle. She fired. The .50 caliber round cut through the sandstorm like it wasn't there. The physics were brutal and simple. Enough mass, enough velocity, and weather became irrelevant. The gunner dropped backward, the machine gun tilting silent toward the sky. Elena was already moving before the brass casing hit the ground. Static positions meant death. She'd learned that lesson in blood during nightfall. 60 meters north, she dropped behind a cluster of rocks and found her next position. Through the scope, she watched the enemies scramble, confused. They had heard the shot but couldn't identify direction through the storm. Perfect. The second heavy machine gun position was more difficult. The crew had gone to ground after seeing their comrades die. They were firing from behind reinforced cover with limited exposure. Elena closed her eyes. This was the technique that had made her both famous and controversial in military circles. Sound mapping, they called it, though the term was inadequate. It was more like 3-dimensional audio sculpture, using the echoes, the reverberations, the tiny shifts in ambient noise to construct a mental image of the battlefield. The machine gun fired in bursts. 6-round bursts, she noted. The sound bounced off the canyon walls, creating interference patterns. But within that chaos, she could hear the metallic clank of the feed tray, the specific resonance of a barrel against a particular type of rock. She opened her eyes and aimed at a point she couldn't see, a spot 3 feet to the left of where the muzzle flash had appeared. She fired. The round punched through the corner of the reinforcement. Ricochet angle. The kind of shot that military manuals said was impossible to calculate in combat conditions. The machine gun went silent. Impossible, someone muttered over Team Nine's radio frequency. An open-channel accidental transmission. Elena smiled grimly. Hawk had called it witchcraft too when she'd first demonstrated the technique, but it was just mathematics and 10,000 hours of practice. The kind of dedication her generation, the ones who'd grown up with computers and GPS and laser rangefinders, supposedly didn't have patience for. She moved again. Closer this time. The third machine gun was dug in too deep for a long-range shot. She needed a different angle. The enemy was panicking now. She could hear it in their fire patterns. Less coordinated, more desperate. They were shooting at ghosts, wasting ammunition on shadows in the sandstorm. Good. She heard Hawk's voice then on the emergency frequency, saying her name, asking her to come home. Home. She hadn't had a home in 18 months. Just missions and safe houses in the endless desert where ghosts walked beside her. But Hawk's voice cut through the isolation like nothing else could. The man who'd trained her, who'd believed in her, who'd tried to find her after nightfall and failed because she'd buried herself too deep. Hawk, her voice cracked on his name. Is that really you? It's me, kid, and you just saved our lives. Not yet, I haven't. But she would, because this time she wasn't at 800 meters away watching through a scope. This time she was close enough to matter. This time no one would die while she watched helplessly from 2 on away. Elena slung the Barrett and drew her SR-25, lighter faster for close-range work. Then she began her descent into the valley, moving through terrain that should have been impassable under fire. The enemy never saw her coming. She used the storm as camouflage, the wind as a silencer, the chaos as cover. When she reached the base of the eastern ridge, she was within 200 meters of the remaining machine gun nest, close enough to hear them talking, close enough to smell their fear. She raised the SR-25 and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. The third machine gun position collapsed into silence. Who the hell is covering us? Someone from Team 9 shouted over the radio, no longer caring about discipline. Elena didn't answer. She was already moving toward their position, closing the final distance, because the enemy wasn't defeated. She could hear the sharp whistle commands, the movement of reinforcements. They were regrouping for a final push, and she needed to be inside Team 9's perimeter before that happened. Through a gap in the storm, she caught sight of the SEALs. They'd formed a defensive perimeter around their wounded. Professional, disciplined, even in extremis, they maintained their tactical integrity. She circled wide, approaching from their rear flank where they'd least expect contact. Eagle 9, this is Wraith 6. She transmitted on their frequency using her old call sign. Approaching from your 6 o'clock. Do not engage. The radio crackled with silence. Then a voice she didn't recognize, young, shocked. Wraith 6, that call sign is, you're supposed to be, then Elena moved through this perimeter in a low crouch. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. I'm coming in, don't shoot me. She emerged from the sandstorm like something out of myth, covered in desert camouflage and sand, the Barrett across her back, eyes hard as stone behind her ballistic glasses. Not quite human anymore. Something forged in isolation and guilt. Bennett saw her first. His eyes went wide with recognition. Then Morrison, who looked like he'd seen an actual ghost, which in a way he had. Elena dropped beside the largest rock outcropping, where a man in his late 30s crouched coordinating fire, Lieutenant Commander Nathaniel Mercer. She'd never met him, but she knew the look of a SEAL commander when she saw one. Mercer, she asked. Cross. His voice carried a complexity she didn't have time to unpack. What the hell are you doing here? Saving your ass, apparently. She scanned the ridge through her scope. How many casualties? 3 wounded. Sullivan's critical leg wound, possibly arterial. We're almost Winchester on ammo. Air support is 30 minutes out. You won't last 10. Behind them, Hawk had abandoned his broken radio and was moving toward them. When Elena saw him, something in her chest tightened. He looked older. The years and the wounds had carved deeper lines into his face, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing, knowing. Elena, just her name. But it carried 18 months of worry and relief. Hawk, she wanted to say more. Wanted to explain, but a mortar round whistled overhead, exploding 30 meters behind them. Hawk's expression hardened. They've got our range. Elena nodded. Then we don't stay here. She pointed to the canyon leading north. There's a defensive position 2 clicks that way. Natural amphitheater. Limited approaches. We can hold there. Mercer's face changed as memory caught up with map reading. Wait, that's where Operation Nightfall. Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. Yes. Cross that. I know every inch of that terrain. She met his eyes, including where they'll try to flank us. We move in 3 minutes. Hail Cross, there's 20 of them left and one of you. Then the odds are in my favor. She checked her ammunition. 3 magazines for the Barrett, 1 for the SR-25. Enough. It would have to be enough. 3 minutes, Commander. I suggest you use them. She could see the calculation in Mercer's eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. Command authority versus survival instinct. He was a good officer, which meant he knew when to accept help, even from ghosts. All right, he said finally, but you're not doing this alone. Bennett Morrison, you're on rear guard with Cross. No, Elena's voice was firm. They stay with the team. I work better alone. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply true. She'd spent 18 months learning to fight without anyone to watch her back, without anyone to coordinate with, without anyone to slow her down. She'd become something different out here in the desert, something the military had a hard time categorizing. She'd become effective. Mercer looked like he wanted to argue, but another mortar round closer this time ended the debate. 3 minutes, he repeated, and began organizing his team. Elena moved back to the perimeter, settling into a position with overlapping fields of fire. She loaded a fresh magazine into the Barrett, checked her secondary weapons, and prepared to do what she did best. Make the enemy regret they ever came to this valley. The withdrawal was controlled chaos. Team 9 moved in a tactical column, Bennett and Morrison carrying Sullivan between them. Mercer maintained security at point. Hayes stayed with the wounded. Hawk, despite his injured arm, covered the rear with his sidearm. Elena shadowed them from an elevated position, her scope sweeping for threats. The enemy spotted the movement and opened fire. Rounds churned the sand around the retreating SEALs. Elena began target elimination. Shot 1. Hostile fighter rising to throw a grenade. Center mass, 340 meters. Shot 2. Machine gunner repositioning. Headshot, 410 meters through partial concealment. Shot 3. Squad leader directing fire. Through a gap in the rocks, 380 meters. Each shot bought Team 9 precious seconds. Each elimination sowed confusion in enemy ranks. They couldn't understand where death was coming from. Couldn't coordinate their fire effectively. Elena moved between shots, never firing from the same position twice, appearing and vanishing. Impossible to predict or pin down. A ghost in truth now. The Barrett's magazine ran dry. She reloaded smoothly, muscle memory taking over while her mind calculated trajectories and wind shifts. Team 9 had made it halfway to the canyon entrance when disaster struck. An IED, improvised explosive device, hidden beneath the sand, detonated near Morrison. The blast threw him backward, collapsing part of the trail. Not a direct hit, he was alive, but stunned, lying exposed in the open while enemy fire converged on his position. Man down! Mercer's voice cut through the radio. Morrison's hit. Elena didn't hesitate. She broke from her overwatch position and sprinted down the slope, sliding and leaping over obstacles with the kind of reckless speed that should have been impossible, carrying 70 pounds of gear. She reached Morrison in 15 seconds that felt like 15 hours. He was conscious but dazed, blood running from his nose. The blast had cracked his helmet but not penetrated. "Can you run?" she asked. Yeah, I think so." "Then run, now." She hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward cover, then turned back to face the enemy advance. They were pressing hard now, sensing victory, sensing blood in the water. Elena went to one knee, raised the Barrett, and began firing. Not aim shots this time, suppressing fire, forcing them to seek cover. The 50 caliber rounds didn't need to hit flesh to be effective. They punched through rock, shattered cover, created psychological terror. The sound alone, that distinctive crack of a Barrett firing, was enough to make men hesitate. "Cross, fall back," Mercer ordered. She emptied the magazine, 15 rounds in 20 seconds, then rose and ran, following Team 9 into the canyon mouth. Bullets chased her, kicking up sand at her heels. One round passed so close she felt the heat of its passage, the displacement of air against her cheek. Then she was through, into the narrow canyon where the enemy couldn't mask their fire. Mercer grabbed her arm as she stumbled into cover. "You're insane." "I'm thorough," she corrected, breathing hard. "Keep moving. Canyon branches in 300 meters. We take the left branch." "How do you know?" Elena met his eyes. The answer was there in the shadows behind her gaze, in the weight she carried. "Because that's where my team died," she said quietly, "and I swore I'd never let it happen again." The canyon fell silent except for their footsteps and ragged breathing. "Cross," Hawk's voice soft but carrying in the confined space. "We all thought you'd left the service. PTSD, they said. Medical discharge." They lied. Her voice was cold. "I didn't quit, Hawk. I just stopped asking permission." She moved to the front of the column, leading them through terrain she'd memorized in nightmares. The rock walls rose on either side, ancient and indifferent. Her boots found purchase on stone worn smooth by millennia of wind and rare rain. Behind her, she heard Morrison whisper to Bennett, "Is that really her, the ghost of nightfall?" Bennett's response was equally quiet. "If it is, we just got saved by a legend." Elena tried not to listen, tried not to remember that legends were built on failure as much as success, that the reason they called her ghost had nothing to do with her skills and everything to do with being the only one who had walked away from nightfall alive. The canyon branched, left toward the amphitheater, right toward open desert and a slower death. She took them left. The memories pressed closer with every step. This was the path the quick reaction force had taken 18 months ago. Too late. Always too late. They'd found her here sitting against a rock, Donovan's blood still wet on her hands. "Cross." Mercer's voice pulled her back to the present. "How much further?" 200 meters. "Then we'll have high ground and defensible positions. And if they follow us in, then we kill every single one of them." The amphitheater opened before them like a wound in the earth. A natural bowl carved from sandstone with steep walls and limited approaches. It was beautiful in a harsh way. The kind of beauty that didn't care whether you lived or died. Elena stopped at the entrance, and for a moment she couldn't move forward, couldn't step into that space again, because she could see them. 7 ghosts scattered across the rocks, each marking a spot where a good man had bled out while she was too far away to help. "Elena!" Hawk's hand on her shoulder. Gentle, understanding. "We need to set up defensive positions." "I know." But her voice was distant. "Donovan died at grid 347, Stevens at 352, Parker." "Elena," firmer now. "You can honor them later. Right now we need you present. We need you here." She blinked, nodded, pushed the ghost back down where they lived most of the time, in the dark places between heartbeats. "Right." She moved into the amphitheater, her tactical mind overriding her trauma. "Bennett, take the eastern approach with the M240. Morrison wants your steady north approach with your rifle. Mercer, you coordinate from center and plug gaps." "And you?" Mercer asked. Elena looked up at the highest point of the amphitheater, a narrow ledge that gave her an overview of all approaches. Exposed, vulnerable, exactly where a sniper shouldn't be, which made it the last place they'd look. "I'll be everywhere they're not expecting." She climbed, hand over hand, feet finding purchase on stone. The Barrett across her back threatened to pull her down, but she'd made harder climbs with heavier loads. At the top, she settled into position and looked down at the amphitheater floor, at Team 9 setting up their defense, at Hawk directing them with the calm authority of 4 decades' experience, at the wounded being made as comfortable as possible in the center of the perimeter, and at the 7 spots where ghosts waited patiently for her to join them. Not today, she thought. Not ever again if I can help it. The enemy would come soon. She could hear their approach echoing through the canyon. Angry, determined, committed now to finishing what they'd started. Elena checked her ammunition one final time, settled her breathing, let her heartbeat slow to the rhythm of patience, and waited for the killing to begin again. Because this was what she did now. This was who she'd become. Not the woman who watched her team die from 800 meters away. Not the captain who followed orders that got good men killed. She was Wraith. And in this amphitheater on this ground, soaked with the blood of 7 men she'd failed to save, she would prove that distance had been the problem. Today, she was close enough. Today, no one else would die while she watched from too far away. The first enemy fighters appeared at the canyon entrance silhouetted against the afternoon sun filtering through the sandstorm. Elena put her eye to the scope and whispered to the ghost that surrounded her, "Watch this." Then she began to fire. The enemy arrived 20 minutes later, moving in two assault groups with a reserve element holding back. Elena counted them through her scope. Approximately 30 hostiles. They'd called in reinforcements, treating Team 9 as a high-value target worth committing resources to eliminate. Good. The more they committed here, the fewer resources they had elsewhere. From her elevated position, she had a god's eye view of the battlefield. The eastern approach was most obvious, a gentle slope with scattered cover. The northern approach was rockier, harder terrain, but possible for experienced climbers. The western approach was nearly vertical suicide for anyone attempting it. Nearly. Elena had learned long ago that desperate men did stupid things. And these men were desperate now, having lost over a dozen fighters to a ghost they couldn't see. The Eastern Assault Group advanced first using proper fire and movement tactics. One element provided covering fire, while another bounded forward to new cover. They were well trained, probably former military themselves, mercenaries, or foreign special forces contracted for this operation. Elena let them come, watching their pattern, identifying the leaders by how the others oriented on them. The squad leader was obvious, hanging back slightly, directing movement with hand signals. When they reached the kill zone, she transmitted one word. Now, Team 9 opened fire. The eastern approach became a slaughter. Bennett's M240 machine gun ripped through the advancing fighters with devastating effect. Morrison recovered from his blast-induced daze, fired with disciplined precision. Mercer coordinated their fire, calling out targets and sectors with the calm efficiency of a conductor directing an orchestra of violence. The enemy had expected resistance, but not this level of coordination, not this precision. They fell back, leaving 3 dead and multiple wounded scattered across the rocks. The Northern Assault Group tried next, using the rocky terrain for cover. They were more careful, having seen their comrades' fate. They moved slowly, checking corners, minimizing exposure. Elena engaged them from her elevated position. The angle was difficult. She was shooting almost straight down the geometry, requiring adjustments most snipers never practiced. But Hawk had made her practice it thousands of times. Elevation shooting changes everything, he'd taught her. Gravity affects the round differently. You need to understand the physics. 200 meters, nearly vertical, one shot. Enemy fighter exposed for 3 seconds while repositioning. She fired. He dropped. 300 meters steep angle, one shot, 2 kills. The round passed through the first target and struck the second behind him. The physics of the 50 caliber round meant that soft targets didn't slow it much. It kept going, carrying death to whoever stood in line. The northern group broke and retreated, their will shattered by death from an impossible angle. Then the western assault came, the suicide approach, except they weren't attacking. They were establishing a support by fire position, and behind them, being set up with methodical care, was a mortar tube. "Incoming," Elena shouted. "Mortars!" The first round landed short, throwing up a geyser of sand and rock 30 meters from Team 9's position. A ranging shot. The next would be adjusted, and the next, until they walked the mortars right into the amphitheater and turned it into a killing zone with nowhere to hide. Elena scanned frantically through her scope, searching for the mortar team. They'd be behind the ridge, protected by terrain. She caught a reflection. Sunlight on metal, the mortar tube. The shot was impossible. 600 meters through variable wind, shooting at a target she could barely see, needing to arc the bullet over a ridge and down into a depression. Every instructor she'd ever had would say not to attempt it. Would say to find a different solution. Would say the probability of success was near zero. Elena fired. The mortar tube exploded in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. The 50 caliber round, designed to penetrate light armor, had struck the tube at precisely the angle needed to detonate a shell being loaded. The western assault position went silent. Mercer stared up at her position, his expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. "Did you just—" "Yes." She was already reloading, scanning for the next threat. They'll try one more push, all 3 approaches simultaneously. That's when they're most vulnerable. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. 10 minutes later, the enemy committed to their final assault. They came hard and fast, accepting casualties to close the distance. This was desperation now. They'd invested too much to retreat. Pride in contracts and whatever they'd been paid demanded they finish this. Team 9 fought with the ferocity of men who knew this was the last stand. Bennett's machine gun spoke in steady bursts, each one claiming lives. Morrison fired with mechanical precision, his earlier fear burned away by combat adrenaline. Mercer moved between positions, directing fire plugging gaps, the very image of leadership under fire. Hayes, the corpsman, had propped up Sullivan despite his leg wound. The injured man was shooting steadily, with his rifle refusing to be dead weight. That kind of courage was common among SEALs. They fought until they couldn't hold a weapon, and sometimes even after. Hawk coordinated from the center position, his wounded arm, forgotten his sidearm, barking whenever an enemy fighter got too close. 62 years old, and he was still in the fight, still protecting his people. Elena ran through her magazines with controlled aggression. The Barrett spoke again and again, each shot a hammer blow against the enemy advance. But there were too many. They were too close. The angles were collapsing. She switched to her SR-25 as the range decreased. Faster rate of fire, though, less devastating per shot. 10 rounds, 12, 15. The magazine ran dry, and she loaded her last one. Still they came. Morrison took a round to his body armor, the impact knocking him down. He struggled to rise, stunned by the force. Bennett's machine gun jammed at the worst possible moment. He fought with it, fingers flying over the mechanisms, but precious seconds ticked away. Mercer was bleeding from a graze across his shoulder, but still fighting, still leading. This was it, the moment where everything balanced on a knife's edge, where battles were decided not by superior numbers or better position, but by sheer will. Elena made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. She stood up, fully exposed on her elevated ledge, completely visible to every enemy fighter in the amphitheater. And she began firing her pistol, not at the enemy, into the air, drawing every eye to her position, making herself the target. The enemy fire shifted, converging on her location. Rounds sparked off rocks around her, whined past her head close enough to feel. One creased her thigh, a line of fire that she ignored. Another grazed her ribs, burning through her shirt. But for 5 seconds, 5 precious, eternal seconds, they weren't shooting at Team 9. Bennett cleared his jam and opened fire, the M240 roaring back to life. Mercer rallied his men, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Morrison got back up and began engaging targets, his rifle finding enemy after enemy. The enemy assault broke, not slowly, not with tactical withdrawal. They simply broke, turned and ran. Their will to fight shattered by a team that refused to die and a ghost who wouldn't let them win. Elena climbed down from her ledge, her legs shaking from adrenaline crash. Her thigh wound was superficial, more annoying than dangerous. The rib graze burned but hadn't penetrated. She'd been incredibly lucky. Or maybe the ghosts had protected her. She'd promised them she wouldn't let it happen again. Maybe they'd believed her. Mercer caught her as she reached the ground. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen." "That was Tuesday," she replied, and finally allowed herself to feel the pain. The enemy didn't return. They'd taken too many casualties, lost too much equipment, and failed to overcome a much smaller force. By military logic, they'd withdraw and reassess. Team 9 used the lull to tend their wounds and redistribute what little ammunition remained. Elena sat apart from the team, field dressing her leg wound. It was superficial, more annoying than dangerous, but it needed attention. The rib graze was already clotting and the bleeding stopped. Hawk approached carrying a first aid kit. "Let me. I've got it." "Elena, let me." She relented, too tired to argue. He worked in silence for a moment, his hands steady and professional, despite his own injuries. The shrapnel wound on his forearm had been hastily bandaged, but he moved like it didn't exist. "Why did you come back?" he asked quietly so the others wouldn't hear. "I heard the distress call, recognized the pattern." "That's not what I'm asking." He tied off the bandage on her thigh. "You disappeared 18 months ago. Went completely dark. I looked for you, Elena, used every contact I had. It was like you'd been erased. I wanted to be erased. Because of Nightfall." It wasn't a question. Hawk had been recalled to evaluate. The team had been there for the briefing. He'd seen Reeves assign her to Overwatch. He'd objected, though his objections had carried no weight. He hadn't been on the mission itself, already back at base when the ambush happened. But he'd seen the aftermath, seen her kneeling in the blood and dust. 7 people, Hawk. 7. Her voice was barely a whisper. I had the scope, the rifle, the skills you taught me, but I was too far away. Because Reeves said women belong in support. That wasn't your fault. Doesn't matter. They're still dead. Hawk finished with her wounds and sat back. So you've been running solo missions for 18 months. No backup, no support, no one else to watch die. Yes. That's not courage, Elena. That's cowardice. The words hit like a slap. She looked at him, anger flaring. I've completed 17 black operations in 18 months. Dismantled 3 enemy networks. Saved countless lives. How is that cowardice? Because you're running from connection, from trust, from the possibility that you might work with others and they might survive. His voice was gentle despite the harsh words. You're not protecting them by staying away. You're protecting yourself from feeling that loss again. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He met her eyes. I've trained snipers for 40 years, lost students in combat, good men and women who learned everything I could teach them and still died. You think I don't know survivor's guilt? Then you know why I had to leave. I know why you think you had to leave. But Elena, what you did today, saving this team, fighting alongside them, that took real courage. The kind that risks connection and loss. That's what you've been running from. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it was different, that she was different, that the system was broken, and she'd found a way to work around it. But a part of her, the part that remembered how it felt to fight beside others, to hear Hawk's voice, after 18 months of silence, to see Morrison's gratitude and Mercer's respect, that part wondered if he was right. Before she could respond, they heard it. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors cutting through the desert air. Air support's here, Mercer called out. Finally! The Blackhawks settled into the amphitheater, rotors kicking up sand and noise. The door gunners scanned for threats, but the battlefield was quiet now. The enemy had withdrawn, leaving their dead behind. Mercer stood preparing to coordinate the evacuation. But he paused, looking at Elena. Command's going to want to know about this, about you being operational. Tell them whatever you want. She rose, testing her wounded leg. I'll be gone before they decide what to do about it. Cross, Elena. He caught her arm, not restraining, but asking, You saved all of us today. That has to count for something. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. Saw genuine gratitude there. Respect. The acknowledgement of one warrior to another. It counts for me not having to add 8 more names to my list, she said finally. That's enough. Morrison approached, then limping slightly, supported by Hayes. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you for coming back for me when I was down. The other team members gathered around, Bennett massive and steady, Hayes competent and calm, Sullivan pale from blood loss but alive, and Hawk watching her with those knowing eyes. You would have done the same, she said. Maybe, Mercer replied, but we wouldn't have done it better. The pilot called out that they needed to evacuate. Time to go. Elena picked up her rifle, the Barrett that had become like an extension of her body. She was about to board the helicopter when Mercer called out one more time. Where will you go? She paused at the door, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Wherever they need me next. The Black Hawk had been airborne for less than 3 minutes when the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Command, this is Raptor 7. We have multiple technical vehicles emerging from North Canyon, heading toward Rally Point. Mercer moved to the door gunner's position and looked down. 3 vehicles mounted with heavy weapons were racing across the desert toward a specific coordinate, the ground extraction team's rally point. They're going for the extraction team, he said. Ground units will be there in 15 minutes. They'll be massacred. Elena leaned forward. How long until that extraction team arrives? 15 minutes. They'll be slaughtered. She looked at the pilot. Can you get us back down? The pilot shook his head. Negative. I have orders to RTB with casualties. We're not engaging. Elena turned to Mercer. Then I need you to drop me. Fast rope insertion. Drop me back at a tactical position. I can delay them long enough for the extraction team to arrive with proper support. That's suicide. 3 vehicles. Probably 20 hostiles. You're already wounded. 23. She'd counted them through the scope. And I've fought worse odds. Mercer looked at his wounded men, at Sullivan pale and bleeding, at Morrison still recovering from the blast, at Hayes exhausted from hours of combat medicine. Then at the convoy below racing toward unsuspecting Americans. The calculation was brutal and simple. Sacrifice one to save many more. Pilot, how many can we drop and still evacuate the wounded? Two, sir, maximum. Mercer's jaw tightened. Bennett, you're with us. Sir, that's an order. He turned to the others. Hayes, Morrison, get our wounded back to base. Morrison started to protest, but Mercer cut him off. Your team needs you alive, petty officer. We need you to tell them what happened here today. The helicopter circled back while the crew chief rigged the fast rope. Elena checked her gear. 2 magazines left for the Barrett, 1 for her SR-25. Running on fumes, but it would have to be enough. What's the plan? Bennett asked as he clipped onto the rope. I draw their attention, Elena said. You two flank and disable the vehicles. Without mobility, they're just infantry in the open. And if we can't disable them, then we improvise. She went down the rope, first hands burning. Despite her gloves, the ground rushing up impossibly fast. She hit the dirt, rolled, and came up with her rifle ready. Mercer and Bennett followed seconds later. The helicopter banked away, leaving them alone with the approaching enemy. Stay sharp, Elena said. And remember, we just need to delay them, not defeat them. Where do you want us? Mercer asked. I'll take the ridge overlooking that defile. It'll channel them single file. You two flank from the north and south. Wait for my first shot, then engage. They moved into position with practiced efficiency. These were professionals. They understood fire and movement cover and concealment. They'd trust her call. Elena ran toward the ridge, her wounded leg protesting but functional. She reached the position just as the first technical vehicle came into view. A pickup truck with a DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. Soviet-era weapon still deadly. The second vehicle was similarly equipped. The third carried what looked like a recoilless rifle. That was the real threat, a weapon designed to destroy armor and fortified positions. Elena settled into position scope on the lead vehicle. 600 meters, moving target, east wind at 15 kilometers per hour. She centered her crosshairs on the driver. Fired. The .50 caliber round penetrated the windshield and struck the driver with catastrophic force. The hydraulic shock alone would have been fatal. The vehicle swerved, crashed into a boulder, and flipped onto its side. The other 2 vehicles scattered, drivers realizing they were under sniper fire. Good. Scattered meant confused. Confused meant vulnerable. Mercer and Bennett were already moving to flanking positions, using the terrain to close distance. Elena provided covering fire, keeping the enemy focused on her position while her team maneuvered. The second vehicle's machine gunner spotted her and opened fire. Heavy rounds chewed into the rocks around her position, forcing her to relocate. She low-crawled 20 meters to a new height, leaving her pack behind to save weight. Through her scope, she saw Mercer reach the overturned vehicle. He engaged the survivors with his rifle, dropping 2 before they could return effective fire. Bennett was closing on the second vehicle from the rear, moving like a ghost himself. The third vehicle, the one with the recoilless rifle, was setting up to engage. If that weapon fired, it could destroy the rocky cover, keeping them alive. Elena aimed at the loader, the man handling the large caliber ammunition. 700 meters, extreme range for accuracy, but she didn't have a choice. She fired. Miss. The round sparked off the metal frame of the weapon mount, but it had the desired effect. The loader and gunner both ducked, buying her 5 seconds. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, her last round for the Barrett. Everything after this would be close-range work with her secondary weapon. She fired again. This time the loader dropped. The heavy ammunition round fell from his hands, rolling away from the gun position. But the gunner was still alive, and he was turning the massive weapon toward Mercer's position. Elena threw down the empty Barrett and sprinted forward, drawing her pistol. The math was simple and terrible. She had to close the distance to effective pistol range before that recoilless rifle fired, or Mercer died. 200 meters of open ground, no cover. Enemy fire all around her. She ran like she'd never run before. Her wounded legs screamed. Her lungs burned. Every muscle pushed beyond its limit. Rounds kicked up dirt at her feet. Something tugged at her sleeve, a miss by inches. 100 meters. The recoilless rifle was nearly aligned with Mercer's position. 50 meters. The gunner's finger was on the trigger. Elena dropped and slid the last 10 meters on her stomach, coming to rest behind the vehicle's rear wheel. She rose, put 3 rounds through the gunner's chest at point-blank range, then turned and fired twice more at the driver who was reaching for a weapon. The third vehicle was silent. She slumped against the tire, breathing in great gasping gulps, her body shaking from adrenaline crash. The wound on her thigh had reopened, blood seeping through the bandage. Her ribs burned where the earlier round had grazed her. Mercer appeared beside her. "You just ran through 200 meters of fire." "I noticed." She gasped for air. "That was stupid." "I know." She looked up at him. "But you're alive, so I'm calling it a win." Bennett jogged over, breathing hard. "Second vehicle is neutralized. Most of the hostiles are dead or retreating." The extraction team called in. They were 90 seconds out. The cavalry was coming. As if summoned, the sound of armored vehicles echoed through the canyon. 2 MRAPs and a Humvee appeared, moving fast and purposeful. The extraction team arriving with proper support. Elena tried to stand and found her legs wouldn't cooperate. Too much adrenaline, too much exertion, too much everything finally catching up. Mercer caught her. "Easy, you've done enough." "Have I?" She looked at the battlefield. The destroyed vehicles, the bodies, the scorched earth. "Because it feels like I keep fighting the same battle over and over." "Maybe," he said gently, "or maybe you finally fought it to a conclusion." The extraction team medic rushed over, but Elena waved him off. "Check the others first. I'm mobile." "Ma'am, you have multiple contusions, a reopened leg wound, possible fractured ribs." "I said check the others first." Her voice had the hard edge of someone who would not be argued with. The medic wisely moved to Bennett, who'd taken some minor shrapnel during the fighting. Mercer stayed beside Elena as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. The same desert where her team had died 18 months ago. The same rocks, the same Satnam, the same wind. But this time everyone was going home. "Cross," Mercer said quietly. "Elena, if you," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "what you did today, it matters. Not just the lives saved, but proving that you can work with a team again, that you can trust others." "Can I?" She watched the medics working efficient and professional. "Or did I just get lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it. You made 47 confirmed kills today. Ran through fire twice. Made shots that shouldn't be possible." He crouched beside her. "That's not luck. That's skill and courage." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to accept that maybe Hawk was right, that she'd been running from connection rather than protecting it. But 18 months of isolation didn't disappear in one day, no matter how successful. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to figure out who I am now, what I can be." "Fair enough." He stood, offered his hand. "But if you ever decide you're ready, there's a place for you. With us. With people who understand what you've sacrificed." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Together they walked toward the extraction vehicles in the journey back to base. Behind them, the amphitheater stood silent. The ghosts remained as they always would. But maybe, just maybe, they were quieter now, satisfied that she'd finally fought close enough to matter. The medical evaluation took 3 hours. Elena endured the process with gritted teeth, allowing the doctors to catalog her injuries. Minor shrapnel wounds from the amphitheater fight. Second-degree burns from repeated muzzle flash exposure. Deep tissue bruising across her shoulders from the Barrett's recoil. The reopened leg wound. The rib graze. Dehydration. Exhaustion. Nothing that would stop her from walking out under her own power. Nothing that would keep her here longer than necessary. Morrison found her as she was preparing to leave the medical tent. His leg was bandaged, and he moved with a slight limp, but he was alive and mobile. "Ma'am, could I speak with you?" She nodded. "I just wanted to say..." He paused, struggling with the words. "You saved the entire team. You saved my life, specifically when I was down after the IED. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing." She looked at him, so young, barely old enough to vote, but already a veteran of desert warfare. "You would have done the same for me." "I don't know if I could have." He met her eyes. "Running through fire like that. Making shots no one should be able to make. Fighting alone for so long." He paused. "How do you do it?" Elena considered the question. A year ago, she would have deflected or given some hard-edged response about training and discipline. But Morrison deserved better. He'd fought well today, earned the right to honest answers. You do it by remembering why, she said finally, by carrying the names of everyone you couldn't save and letting that weight push you forward instead of pulling you down. By accepting that sometimes the mission requires you to stand alone, even when every instinct screams to run. She paused, then added quietly, and by hoping that one day you save enough lives to balance the ones you lost. Morrison nodded slowly, processing. Thank you, ma'am, for coming back for us. After he left, Hawk appeared. He'd changed into fresh utilities and had a proper bandage on his forearm where the shrapnel had hit. But he moved carefully, favoring his wounded arm. Command wants to see you, he said. Full debrief. I'm sure they do. Elena picked up her rifle case. Tell them I'll submit a written report. Elena, the use of her first name stopped her. They want to give you a medal, Bronze Star at minimum. Probably Silver Star given the circumstances. No, Yaman, you can't just refuse. Watch me. She slung the case over her shoulder. I don't need recognition. I need to keep working. Doing what running solo missions until something finally kills you. If that's what it takes. Hawk stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Not threatening, but insistent. It doesn't have to be that way. You proved today that you can work with a team, that you can trust others again. Come back to the unit properly. Lead, teach, be part of something larger. For a moment, just a moment, Elena imagined it. Returning to regular operations, working with a team, having backup and support, not carrying the weight alone. Then she remembered Donovan's face. Stevens laughing at some joke she couldn't remember. Parker's quiet competence. Walsh's steady hands on the saw. Coleman humming country songs. Brooks working his radio. Declan Sullivan, who'd believed in saving lives. All dead. All beyond her reach. All names carved into her memory like epitaphs. I can't, she said simply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She started to walk away, but Hawk called after her one more time. Cross, Elena. If you ever decide you're ready, there's a place for you here. With us. She paused at the tent entrance, silhouetted against the night sky beyond. The desert stretched away in all directions, vast and empty and familiar. Her home for 18 months. Her sanctuary and her prison. I'll remember that, she said. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness like the ghost she'd become. Hawk stood alone in the medical tent, watching the space where she'd been. 40 years of training snipers, hundreds of students, some became legends. Some died in combat, some retired to quiet lives. But Elena Cross was different. She'd taken everything he'd taught her and forged it into something new. Something necessary and dangerous. A weapon that walked alone because she couldn't bear to watch others fall. He understood, more than she knew. He'd lost students before. Watched them die in operations he'd trained them for. Carried their names the same way she carried her 7. The difference was that he'd learned to keep fighting alongside others. To accept that loss was part of the profession. That isolating yourself didn't protect anyone, it just meant you carried the weight alone. Elena hadn't learned that yet. Maybe she never would. But today, for a few hours, she'd remembered what it meant to fight beside others. To protect and be protected. To be part of something larger than her guilt. Mercer approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Hawk. She's not coming back, is she? The SEAL commander asked. Not yet. Hawk sipped the coffee. It was terrible as military coffee always was, but it was hot and caffeinated and exactly what he needed. But she took a step today, toward people instead of away from them. That's progress. Will she be all right out there alone? Hawk thought about the question. Thought about the woman who'd made 47 confirmed kills in one day. Who'd run through 200 meters of fire. Who'd made impossible shots with mechanical precision. Who'd saved 17 lives without hesitation. She's the most dangerous human being I've ever trained, he said finally, and the most principled. She'll be fine. That's not what I asked. No. Hawk looked out at the desert night. But it's the only answer I have. They stood in silence, 2 warriors watching the darkness where a third had vanished. Somewhere out there, Elena Cross was moving through the night, alone but not helpless, isolated but not broken, a ghost in the sandstorm. And where she walked, others lived. For now, Hawk decided that would have to be enough. 3 weeks later, SEAL Team 9 was conducting training exercises at the Nevada Desert facility when Morrison noticed the figure on the observation tower. Someone watching through a scope, evaluating their movements with the stillness of a professional. He couldn't make out details at this distance, but something about the posture was familiar. Morrison raised his hand in greeting. The figure waved back, then vanished as if they had never been there at all. "Did you see that?" Morrison asked Bennett, who was checking his rifle nearby. "See what? Someone on the tower, watching us?" Bennett scanned the structure. Empty now. Probably a range safety or one of the instructors. But Morrison knew better. He'd seen that particular stillness before, in an amphitheater carved from sandstone with a ghost who'd saved their lives. She was still watching over them, even if she couldn't stand beside them. Mercer had been right during the debrief. Elena Cross hadn't left the war. She'd just found her own way to fight it, a way that honored her fallen team while protecting the ones still standing. Morrison returned to his training, but he felt better knowing she was out there, somewhere in the vast desert, a guardian in the shadows. That night, Mercer received a classified briefing in his quarters. The folder was thin, marked with security classifications he rarely saw outside of operational planning. He opened it and began to read. The report detailed a series of operations in the Eastern Territories. 3 enemy networks dismantled over 6 months. Arms dealers arrested. Terrorist cells neutralized. Supply lines destroyed. Countless lives saved through intelligence gathered and threats eliminated. All conducted by a single operator. Solo missions. No backup. No support. The reports were marked with a call sign Wraith 6. Mercer smiled, understanding finally. Elena hadn't disappeared. She'd evolved, found a way to do what she did best without the constraints of a system that had failed at her, without the risk of watching others die because some colonel kept them too far from the fight. He closed the folder and locked it in his safe. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and raised the glass toward the window, toward the desert night beyond. "Stay safe out there, Cross," he whispered, "and thank you." The bourbon burned going down, warming him from the inside. Tomorrow he'd lead his team through more training, prepare them for the next mission, the next threat, the next battle in an endless war. But tonight he allowed himself to feel grateful for the ghost who'd saved them, for the warrior who fought alone so others wouldn't have to, for Elena Cross who'd turned survivor's guilt into protective fury and forged herself into something the enemy feared and the innocent never saw. She walked alone through the sandstorm, and where she walked, others lived. That, Mercer decided, was a kind of heroism the world would never fully understand. But he understood. His team understood. 6 months after the engagement, a different kind of battle was being fought in a military courtroom at Fort Bragg. Colonel Marcus Reeves stood at attention, his uniform still crisp despite the weight of the accusations pressing down on him. 40 years of service, commendations, combat deployments, a career built on certainty and traditional values, all of it crumbling under the weight of evidence he couldn't deny. The prosecutor presented the facts with clinical precision. Colonel Reeves had access to mission planning for both Operation Nightfall and the Team 9 extraction. In both cases, intelligence indicated potential compromise. In both cases, warnings came from junior officers and analysts. In both cases, Colonel Reeves dismissed these warnings. The screen behind the prosecutor displayed communication logs, emails, reports flagged as urgent, all carrying the same signature, Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, intelligence analyst. Lieutenant Brennan identified anomalies in enemy positioning that suggested prior knowledge of our operations. She brought these concerns to Colonel Reeves on 3 separate occasions. The prosecutor paused, letting that sink in. Colonel Reeves' response, documented in official communications, was to question Lieutenant Brennan's competence, to suggest her analysis was emotional rather than tactical, to dismiss her warnings as the product of, and I quote, a woman's tendency toward paranoia. Reeves's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? The emails were there, his words preserved in digital amber. As a result of Colonel Reeves' dismissal of these warnings, no additional security measures were implemented. No changes were made to operational planning. Major Victoria Brennan, who was Lieutenant Brennan's superior, and who had been selling classified information to hostile forces for 3 years, continued her activities unimpeded. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the rustle of papers. 7 men died in Operation Nightfall. SEAL Team 9 nearly died 6 months ago, all because Colonel Reeves' personal biases prevented him from recognizing credible intelligence when it came from a female analyst. The prosecutor turned to face Reeves directly. Sir, your prejudices didn't just affect personnel assignments. They created blind spots that a traitor exploited. They got good men killed. And when Captain Elena Cross, the sole survivor of Nightfall, tried to tell you that keeping her at 800 meters was tactically unsound, you ignored her too. Captain Cross was assigned to Overwatch because that was the appropriate role for Reeves started. For what, Colonel, for a woman? The prosecutor's voice was sharp now. Captain Cross made 47 confirmed kills in a single day during the Team 9 rescue. She ran through 200 meters of enemy fire. She made shots that your own weapons instructors called impossible. She saved 17 American lives. The prosecutor let that hang in the air. Everything you said she couldn't do, she did. Everything you claimed women weren't capable of in Tier 1 operations, she proved wrong. And 7 men died at Nightfall because you refused to let her do what she was trained for. Reeves had no response to that. The truth was a heavy thing. The investigation had uncovered Major Victoria Brennan within 48 hours of the Team 9 rescue. Someone had left an anonymous package of evidence for military intelligence. Financial records showing deposits from shell corporations, communications logs showing patterns that matched operational leaks, timeline analysis that connected her access to mission failures. They'd never identified who compiled the evidence. But Mercer had his suspicions. Someone with access to classified systems. Someone with electronic warfare training. Someone who'd spent 18 months in the shadows learning to operate outside official channels. Someone like Elena Cross. Brennan had confessed quickly once confronted with the evidence. 15 years in military prison. Dishonorable discharge. The complete destruction of everything she'd built. But the investigation hadn't stopped there. It had traced backward, examining how she'd operated so long undetected, and found that every time someone had raised concerns about security, about anomalies in enemy intelligence, about patterns suggesting insider information, those concerns had been dismissed by one man, Colonel Marcus Reeves. Not because he was complicit. The investigation cleared him of direct involvement. He hadn't taken money, hadn't knowingly assisted the enemy. His hands were technically clean, but his mind had been closed to warnings from female officers, closed to the possibility that women could contribute at the highest levels of military operations, closed to evidence that contradicted his worldview, and that closure had cost lives. The verdict came down 3 days later. Forced retirement, loss of 1 rank, pension reduced but not eliminated. No prison time, his 40 years of service counted for something. But his reputation was destroyed, his legacy tainted. History would remember him not for 4 decades of service, but for the men who died because he couldn't see past his prejudices. Hawk attended the court proceedings as a witness. He'd been there at the Nightfall briefing, heard Reeves override Elena's objections, watched a talented operator be sidelined because of her gender. After the verdict, Hawk stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. Reeves walked past, heading toward the exit and retirement and the end of everything he'd built. Colonel, Hawk called. Reeves stopped, turned. His face was haggard, aged a decade and 6 months. Master Sergeant Patterson, come to gloat. No, sir. Hawk's voice was quiet but firm. I came to tell you something Elena Cross said to me. She said, I don't need recognition. I need to keep working. She didn't want your career destroyed, didn't want revenge. She just wanted to save lives. Reeves' expression flickered, something that might have been shame. She made 47 confirmed kills that day, Hawk continued, saved 17 American operators, proved everything you said she couldn't do, and then she disappeared back into the shadows. Because she's not doing this for glory or vindication. She's doing it because it's right. Hawk stepped closer. You called her a liability, said women don't belong in Tier 1 operations. But sir, with respect, Elena Cross is the finest warrior I've trained in 40 years. And I've trained hundreds. Men and women, the best of the best. And she stands above them all. Not because she's a woman, not despite being a woman, but because she's disciplined, skilled, principled, and willing to sacrifice everything, including recognition and connection, to do what needs to be done. Reeves was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse. I was wrong. Yes, sir, you were. 7 men died because I was wrong. Yes, sir, they did. Reeves nodded slowly, accepting the weight of it. Where is she now, Captain Cross? I don't know, sir. Nobody does. She comes when people need her. Then she disappears. Like a ghost. Will you tell her? Reeves paused. Tell her I'm sorry. For Nightfall, for not listening, for all of it. Hawk considered that. If I see her, I'll tell her. But Colonel, she doesn't need your apology. She's already moved past it. You're the one who needs to live with what happened, not her. Reeves nodded again. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, toward his forced retirement in the long years of knowing he'd been catastrophically wrong. Hawk watched him go, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity. Just a weary acceptance that sometimes the system failed. Sometimes good people died because of closed minds. And sometimes warriors like Elena had to operate outside that system to do what the system wouldn't allow. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to an encrypted number. No words, just coordinates and a single emoji, a ghost. The message showed as delivered, but no response came. That was fine. He knew she was out there. Still fighting, still protecting, still walking alone through sandstorms. And maybe eventually she'd be ready to come home. 2 months after the court proceedings, Morrison was working late in the Team 9 Operations Center when his computer pinged with an incoming message. The sender was listed as unknown. The message itself was simple. Grid 34.7N 166.2W. Tomorrow 0600. Come alone, bring notepad. Notepad. Morrison stared at the screen. Those coordinates were in the Nevada desert, middle of nowhere. A 2-hour drive from base. This could be anything, a trap, a test, a mistake. But something in his gut said it wasn't. He printed the message, cleared his browser history, and went to his quarters to prep. The Nevada desert at dawn was cold. Morrison stood at the coordinates, breath misting in the early morning air, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Then he saw her. Elena Cross emerged from behind a rock formation, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone completely comfortable in hostile terrain. She looked different than he remembered. Leaner, harder, her eyes carrying the weight of 6 months operating alone. Ma'am, Morrison said, coming to attention. At ease, Morrison. This isn't official. She gestured to a flat rock. Sit. They sat. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon orange and gold. You wanted to learn sound mapping, Elena said without preamble. The technique I used in the amphitheater. Morrison's eyes widened. You remember that? I remember everything from that day. She pulled out a small rangefinder and a notepad. I can't join the team, can't work within the system that got my people killed. But I can teach. Pass on what Hawk taught me. Make sure the next generation knows how to fight smart, not just hard. Over the next 4 hours, Elena taught Morrison the fundamentals. How to close your eyes and listen to the battlefield. How to hear the shape of terrain through echo and reverberation. How to calculate angles and distances through sound alone. It was exhausting, frustrating. Morrison felt like a child learning to walk. But Elena was patient, more patient than he'd expected. She demonstrated each principle, explained the physics made in practice, until he started to understand. Why are you doing this? Morrison asked during a water break. Teaching me, I mean. You could just disappear. Keep operating alone. Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out across the desert. Because 7 people died while I was learning these skills, she said finally, and I don't want anyone else to die because they didn't know something I could have taught them. Hawk taught you. Yes, and now I'm teaching you. That's how it works. Knowledge passed down, each generation learning from the last. She met his eyes. Hawk's 62. He won't be able to train forever. Someone needs to carry this forward. Why me? Because you asked, because you're curious, because you survived that day, and you want to make sure you survive the next. She paused. And because you remind me of someone I used to be, before everything went wrong. They trained until noon. Then Elena packed her gear. Same time next week, Morrison asked hopefully. If I can, but Morrison understands something. I'm operational. If I don't show it means I'm on mission. Don't try to find me. Don't tell command. This stays between us. Yes, ma'am. And Morrison, you did good work that day, in the amphitheater, when you went down and got back up. That took courage. Your team is lucky to have you. Before he could respond, she was moving, disappearing into the desert with the same ghost-like efficiency she'd arrived with. Morrison watched her go, feeling something shift inside him. He'd been trained by some of the best operators in the world, but this was different. This was learning from someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side carrying hard-won wisdom. He looked down at his notepad filled with calculations and diagrams, with principles that could save his life or his teammates' lives someday. This was Elena's way of coming back, not by joining the team, but by making sure the team survived, by passing on what she'd learned in blood and isolation. Morrison drove back to base, already planning how to practice what she'd taught him, already thinking about the next session. He wouldn't tell Mercer or Hawk. Not yet. This was something private, sacred almost, a warrior passing knowledge to the next generation. This was how traditions survived, how skills were preserved, how the best of the best stayed that way. One student at a time, one lesson at a time, one ghost teaching one soldier how to hear the shape of death before it arrived. 9 months after the engagement, Mercer sat in a briefing room at Dam Neck reviewing the latest intelligence reports. His team was preparing for a high-risk operation in hostile territory, the kind of mission where everything had to go right or everyone came home in body bags. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Check your email, encrypted folder. Password Nightfall 7. Mercer's pulse quickened. He opened his laptop, found the encrypted folder, entered the password. Inside were satellite images of the target area, detailed terrain maps, enemy force composition, guard rotation schedules, weapon placements, everything they'd been trying to gather for weeks, and a text file with tactical recommendations. Written in the efficient, professional style he recognized immediately. Elena had been monitoring their mission planning, had gathered intelligence, had analyzed their approach and identified weaknesses. The recommendations were brilliant. She'd spotted a flanking route they'd missed, identified a vulnerability in the enemy's communication setup, suggested timing adjustments that would maximize their advantage. At the bottom of the document, a single line, "You saved my life in that amphitheater by trusting me. Returning the favor. Stay safe, Wraith." Mercer sat back stunned. She was out there, operating, gathering intelligence. And when she saw her old team heading into danger, she'd reached out. Not officially, not through channels, but directly warrior to warrior. This was her way of being part of the team while staying separate, contributing without rejoining, protecting without being present. He forwarded the intelligence to his team leads with a vague cover story about new sources. They didn't need to know where it came from, just that it was reliable. The mission 3 weeks later went perfectly. The flanking route Elena had identified allowed them to surprise the enemy completely. The communications vulnerability she'd spotted gave them 30 seconds of confusion to exploit. Her timing recommendations meant they hit the target at precisely the moment when enemy readiness was lowest. 0 casualties, mission success, hostages recovered. After the debrief, Mercer stepped outside into the Virginia night. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to that unknown number. "Mission success, 0 casualties. Your intel was critical. Thank you. We owe you." Again. The response came 3 minutes later. "You owe me nothing. Just keep bringing your people home. That's enough." Mercer smiled. She was still out there, still fighting, still protecting, and maybe in her own way she'd found what she needed. Not the official recognition or the team integration, but purpose, connection on her terms, a way to honor her fallen teammates while protecting the ones still standing. He looked up at the stars, thinking about a warrior walking alone through deserts and mountains and hostile territories, gathering intelligence, eliminating threats, saving lives from the shadows. "Stay safe out there, Elena," he whispered to the night, "and thank you." The stars offered no response, but Mercer felt certain somehow that she'd heard him. 1 year after the engagement, Hawk received a package at his home address. No return address, postmarked from Nevada. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Handwritten notes filled every page. Tactical principles, sound mapping techniques, desert warfare strategies, everything Elena had learned in 18 months of solo operations. And on the first page, a dedication written in her precise handwriting, "To Hawk who taught me to hear the truth beneath the noise. These are the lessons I learned when I had no one left to learn from except the desert and my mistakes. Teach them to whoever comes next. Make sure they're ready. Make sure they survive. Thank you for everything. You saved my life more times than you know." Elena, Hawk sat in his study reading through the journal with tears streaming down his weathered face. This was a warrior's legacy. Knowledge earned in blood and isolation. Lessons that could save lives for generations. She'd made peace with it, finally. With nightfall. With her role. With the fact that she could contribute without being part of the official structure. This journal was her way of coming home. Not physically, but by ensuring that everything she'd learned, everything Hawk had taught her would survive, would be passed down, would make the next generation of warriors more capable, more survivable. He turned to the last page, another note shorter this time. "I'm not coming back, not to the teams, not to the system, but I'm not running anymore either. I found my place. In the shadows, in the spaces between missions, protecting people who'll never know my name. That's enough. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not giving up on me. E." Hawk closed the journal carefully, reverently. This was a sacred thing, a warrior's testament, the distilled wisdom of someone who'd walked through hell and emerged not broken but transformed. He would teach these lessons, would pass them on to every student who came through his advanced courses, would make sure that Elena's hard-won knowledge lived on, saving lives long after both of them were gone. That night, he sent a message to that encrypted number he had been holding on to for a year. "Received your journal. It's brilliant. I'm proud of you. Not for the kills or the missions, but for finding your way, for turning pain into purpose. You're exactly what I hoped you'd become. Stay safe out there, kid, and know that you're not alone. Even when you're walking solo, you've got people who believe in you." Hawk, the message showed as read, but no response came. That was fine. He knew she'd read it, knew she'd understand. And in the vast desert where sand met sky, where heat made ghosts of the horizon, a lone figure read the message on her encrypted phone and allowed herself a small smile. Not alone. Even in isolation, not alone. That was something. In the years that followed, stories began to circulate through the special operations community. Whispers about a lone operator who appeared when missions went wrong, who provided intelligence at critical moments, who'd been spotted on ridgelines overlooking operational areas watching through a scope. They called her the Ghost, the Wraith, the Guardian. Some said she was a legend. Some said she was a myth. Some said she was just extremely skilled operators who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But those who'd been there, who'd been pinned down in an amphitheater, or caught in an ambush, or surrounded in hostile territory, they knew different. They'd seen her, or seen the results of her work. The impossible shots, the perfectly timed intelligence, the enemies eliminated from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Morrison became an instructor himself eventually, taught sound mapping techniques to new recruits, passed on what Elena had taught him, what she'd learned from Hawk, what Hawk had developed over 40 years of warfare. The knowledge lived on. Generation after generation, each one learning from the last, each one carrying forward the lessons earned in blood. Mercer made it to commander eventually, ran his own task force, and 3 times over his career he received encrypted messages with intelligence that saved his people's lives, always from unknown numbers, always perfectly timed, always brilliant. He never told anyone where the intelligence came from, just forwarded it with vague attributions and let his people succeed. That was Elena's way, operating from the shadows, contributing without credit, protecting without presence. Bennett retired after 25 years and opened a security consulting firm. Sullivan recovered from his leg wound and went on to lead his own team. Hayes stayed a corpsman, saving lives for another decade before transitioning to civilian medicine. They all carried the memory of that day in the amphitheater, the day a ghost had saved them. The day they'd learned that sometimes the most effective warriors were the ones who never sought recognition. And somewhere in the vast American desert in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the hostile territories where American interests required protection, Elena Cross continued her work. She walked alone through sandstorms and firefights in hostile terrain. She gathered intelligence and eliminated threats and protected people who would never know her name. She carried 7 names carved into her memory like epitaphs: Donovan, Stevens, Parker, Walsh, Coleman, Brooks, Sullivan. But she'd added 17 more names to her list, not deaths: Seville, Morrison, Bennett, Hayes, Sullivan's brother Garrett, Mercer, Hawk, and 11 others whose lives she'd protected that day. The scale was balancing, slowly, one mission at a time, one life saved at a time. Maybe she'd never fully balance it. Maybe the guilt would never completely fade. Maybe she'd walk alone for the rest of her life, unable to risk connection and the possibility of loss. But she'd found purpose, found meaning, found a way to honor her fallen teammates while protecting the ones still standing. There are warriors who fight in the light, their deeds recorded and celebrated. They stand in formation and receive medals and have their names carved into monuments. And there are warriors who fight in the shadow, their victories known only to the ones they save. They walk alone through hostile terrain and ask for nothing but the satisfaction of knowing they made a difference. Captain Elena Cross had made her choice, and where she walked, others lived. That would always be enough. As long as there were people who needed protecting, as long as there were threats in the shadows, as long as there were warriors willing to fight alone so others wouldn't have to, she would be there. A ghost in the desert, a guardian in the darkness. A legend whispered about but never confirmed, and in the quiet moments when the missions were done and the enemies defeated and the night settled over the desert like a blanket, she would look up at the stars and remember. Remember the 7 who died. Remember the 17 who lived. Remember Hawk's words. You're not protecting them by staying away. You're protecting yourself. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe she was running from connection more than toward protection. But she'd found a middle path, teaching Morrison, providing intelligence to Mercer, sending her journal to Hawk, contributing without rejoining, connecting without risking the kind of loss that had broken her at nightfall. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what command wanted or what her friends hoped for, but it was hers, her choice, her way of fighting. And in a world where too many warriors had their choices made for them by colonels who thought they knew better, by systems that couldn't see past tradition, by prejudices that got good people killed, making her own choice meant everything. Elena Cross loaded her gear into her vehicle and drove toward the next mission. The next threat, the next opportunity to prove that distance had been the problem at nightfall, and proximity was the solution. She drove through the desert night alone, but not lonely, isolated, but not broken, carrying the weight of 7 ghosts and 17 lives and a determination that would never fade. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, and beneath them a warrior drove on, toward the next sandstorm, toward the next fight, toward whatever tomorrow brought. Ready, always ready, and that was enough.